Andrew Fox is with me now. He's a Senior Associate Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, former Major in the Parachute Regiment. Andrew, great to have you on the programme, especially as we've had this breaking news about Palestine Action. The government saying it's going to appeal the High Court's decision this morning that the ban on Palestine Action is unlawful. Just to remind us what Dame Victoria Sharp said, the High Court judge involved. The court considered that the prescription calling Palestine Action a terrorist organisation, the prescription of Palestine Action is disproportionate. A very small number of Palestine Action's activities amounted to acts of terrorism within the definition of Section 1 of the 2000 Act. For these and for Palestine Action's other criminal activities, the general criminal law remains available. The nature and scale of Palestine Action's activities falling within the definition of terrorism had not yet reached the level, scale and persistence to warrant prescription. I mean, this is going to be a big story next week because the de-prescribing could happen, in theory, as soon as next Friday. What do you make of this, Andrew?
Well, it strikes me that there is yet another example here of the courts trying to stymie the will of the government. You know, we used to live in a country where Parliament was supreme. Now we live in a country where the courts seem to have the whip hand over the laws that our government wishes to pass. So that's the first point I'd make. And then secondly, of course, you know, terrorism comes in different guises. It has very much a challenging definition, even amongst academic professionals writing about terrorism. So to expect us to encapsulate it fully into a political act is very challenging. But the bottom line is we need to stop lunatics hitting police officers with sledgehammers, breaking into factories, breaking onto Royal Air Force bases and damaging our Royal Air Force's capability. You know, those things to me seem like terrorism and absolutely should be banned.
We'll be careful about this because it could be a retrial, but it does say a lot when Palestine Action is prescribed as a terrorist organisation. That then goes to court, the case you were talking about the sledgehammer, breaking the spine of a police officer, and then those people are found not guilty. Now, that was a jury trial, and there may well be a retrial, so we'll be careful. But does it actually matter whether Palestine Action is prescribed as a terrorist group or not? I think they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm just wondering, in the current atmosphere and given the atmosphere of what you've just said, Andrew, does it matter?
Well, look, it sends a very clear message, I think, about what we are and aren't prepared to tolerate as a society. And I think that's what this really boils down to, rather than sort of vague legal nitpicking. It's like, who are we as a country? Are we a country where this sort of thing is tolerated? Are we a country where this sort of thing doesn't receive the strictest possible legal action against it? Are we a country where Jewish people can feel safe in their homes and places of worship?
And within that,
that's the issue. Well,
Andrew, you've done great work on this, and you've done fantastic social media and talking and action about it as well. On that particular thing, I expect you've seen this story about what's happening in Brighton and other cities as well, where there are activists literally going around door to door, knocking doors and asking people to boycott Israeli products. I think that is really sinister. In fairness to Peter Cardwell, who is the MP for Hove and also the business secretary, he has said that the police need to look into that, but that can be very, very intimidating for Jewish people. I wonder if you've seen those stories and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I have, and I've seen my friend Heidi's posts on this. She lives down that way.
We're talking to her later on.
You are? Oh, wonderful.
Yep.
Well,
she's great. Total hero. Total hero.
Absolutely. But look, this is 1930 stuff. And do you know what? I've done a lot of speeches and events over the last couple of years. The one that always sticks with my mind was to a group of Holocaust survivors who said that it reminded them of 1930s Germany, the atmosphere for Jews in the UK. Now, when Gary Lineker says something reminds him of 1930s Germany, I don't listen for a second. When people who were actually there and who survived the Holocaust tell me that is the environment being created, then I will very much prick up my ears and listen. And that's the really scary thing about all of this, is that we're sliding into this authoritarianism, we're sliding into fascism on certain parts of the left, and yet we now have the courts overturning measures that are designed to try and prevent that. So it's a deeply concerning situation.
We also have a movement, perhaps a good one, from the UN, which has not covered itself in glory in many, many ways. UNRWA, a dreadful organisation, apparently helping Palestinian refugees, but actually not. In fact, indoctrinating them with anti-Israeli rhetoric in the schools. We also have Francesca Albanese, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on the area, and calls for her to go. I've interviewed her and she hates Israel. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I wonder what you make of this movement and this letter signed by a number of countries, including France, and what you think Britain should do about it.
Well, I saw 40 lords have signed a letter urging the Foreign Secretary to back that removal of Francesca Albanese from her position as UN Special Rapporteur. And of course, would support it completely. She's not only been rabidly anti-Israeli, she's been rabidly anti-Semitic in a number of occasions. And if you go to UN Watch or look at Hillel Neuer's stuff, he's got a whole list there of all the different things that she's come out with that firmly cross the line from anti-Zionism into anti-Semitism. So I hope that our foreign secretary does exactly the same thing and joins these calls, joins the French, joins the Americans in calling for her removal.
We'll see what happens there. Well, what do you think the Munich Security Conference, what do you think are the important things in its in-tray today? We know Marco Rubio is going, the Secretary of State, J.D. Vance not going, the Vice President. He was there last year and talked about free speech being under threat in this country. Also, a senior Washington official telling Europeans, defend yourself, don't rely on the US.
Well, we're sort of seeing things divide into two poles here. The US seem to think they can withdraw all their security concerns in Europe, let the Europeans take over and do it in the manner that allows us still to be friends, where we just focus on different parts of the world, which I think in many ways the way Mr. Trump has approached this is the medicine is worse than the disease itself. And he's unfortunately, threatened Denmark over Greenland. Some very unpleasant comments made in public about NATO responsibilities and contributions to Afghanistan and Iraq. And Europe is in a place now where it does need to step up, because I think the chances of America coming to our aid or to our assistance, should, say, Russia involve a Baltic country, are almost nil at this point.
Mm. I just wonder, with the Munich Security Conference, do these things actually mean anything? Do they move the dial? Certainly J.D. Vance did last year by what he said. Or is this just something that just happens to happen? Because obviously Keir Starmer is there today. And I wonder what your view is, Andrew, of NATO as it stands at the moment, because it's been very, very fractured in recent weeks and months.
So does anything actually happen? Well, yes, some pretty big some seismic diplomatic moves have come about from the last NATO security conference. It doesn't have to be any tangible output, but certainly the tone and the mood and
sure.
the sort of direction of diplomatic travel is set. And when it comes to NATO, I think, it is something we need to look into, how we quietly replace that in the background. I think a defensive alliance is entirely reliant on trust and mutual support. The Americans have gone out of their way to shatter that trust. And if you don't have trust, you have nothing. It's very much like a marriage. So the NATO relationships will carry on. They'll rumble on in the background, but we need to find alternate parallel structures with other countries to build those up in the background and let NATO slowly wither away.
Speaking of trust, a lot of our viewers and listeners don't have trust in the BBC. I have some trust in their reporting, and a lot of their reporting I would question, especially when it comes to the Middle East and the wider region. There's been a controversy this week with the chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, and what she said and did in Iran. Can you just talk us through this and give us your view on what has happened?
Yeah, so we had the anniversary parades for the Iranian Revolution in 1979 this week, and a number of journalists, so Bushra Sheikh went out, Lise Doucette went out, and they were reporting on the ground in Tehran, essentially commenting on the parades and the celebrations they were seeing from ordinary Iranians. This is against the backdrop where as many as 40,000, if not more, Iranians have been slaughtered in the streets for protesting the regime, and there's endless pictures of bodies stacked up in morgues that you can see floating around at the moment. So it's a pretty horrific situation. But the point is, you don't get to go to Iran as a journalist without a regime minder. They show you only what they want you to see. It's tightly controlled, and if you report against what they want you to say, then you face repercussions. So the idea that this is somehow a neutral and fair portrayal of Iranians celebrating in Tehran is frankly beyond parody, and the BBC ought to know better. The
line that was particularly of annoyance to many people was when she said the parade was like a family festival, especially given the backdrop of what has happened. I mean, if we are to see those kind of reports, it needs to be abundantly clear who was there, what the minders perhaps told them to say. I'm not suggesting Lise Doucette said something she was told to say, but what she was shown and not shown. I would also question why she was wearing a headscarf when actually some of the women in the street that she was around were not wearing headscarves, and people have been murdered for not wearing headscarves. I mean, that's at least a question that should have been brought up at that point.
Yeah, completely. And the basic journalistic standard seems just to fall away, as you say, when it comes to the BBC and the Middle East. And some of her reporting on the Israel-Gaza conflict has all been similarly questionable. But look, the Iranian regime these are monsters. These are people who've been, taking women's eyes just for not wearing a headscarf. They've been walking around hospitals, executing wounded people lying in their beds because they think they went to the protests. They've even executed some of the doctors who treated those patients. These are absolute monsters, and we shouldn't be reporting on them from our national broadcaster in a way that presents them as some kind of fair and balanced organisation.
Andrew, thank you. As always, Andrew Fox there, Senior Associate Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, former Major in the Parachute Regiment.